Constabulary Force JCF had recommended in 2012 to the Office of the Services Commission that Chairman of the Police Federation, Corporal Rohan James, be retired in the public interest. The damning recommendation followed carefully documented evidence that Corporal James, while purportedly on sick leave, engaged in active political work on behalf of the opposition People's National Party, PNP, in the run-up to the 2011 general elections. Nationwide News has obtained documents detailing the questionable political conduct of Corporal James, who at the time was stationed at the police traffic headquarters. Mahiri Stewart has our report.
In December 2011, the Portia Simpson Miller-led PNP was seeking to unseat the ruling JLP led by Andrew Holness. Authenticated documents seen by Nationwide News suggest Corporal Rohan James was very much committed to that mission. The documents detail that on December 17, 2011, Corporal James applied for and proceeded on sick leave. But there are questions as to whether the corporal was actually unwell. One day after proceeding on sick leave, December 18, Corporal James was seen decked out in PNP gear while doing campaign work for the PNP at Glendale Housing Scheme off Malines Road in the Northwest St. Andrew constituency. More to the point, Corporal James was seen wearing an orange shirt, orange armband with the letters PNP written on it, and an orange cap with the letters PNP also written on it. James was seen in the company of PNP candidate Granville Valentine, who ultimately failed to unseat the JLP's Derek Smith in the general election. According to the documents, Corporal James was seen canvassing votes for the PNP by a resident who recognized him as a serving member of the JCF. That resident called the anti-corruption branch of the JCF and made a report. The anti-corruption branch swiftly deployed 2 policemen to Glendale Housing Scheme, instructing them to pose as residents. The undercover policemen interacted with Corporal James, Granville Valentine, and the rest of the PNP canvass team. On that day, the undercover lawmen videotaped and photographed Corporal James working to win the Northwest St. Andrew seat for the PNP. The documents we've seen meticulously detail the same movements and descriptions of the political scene on that fateful day, with Corporal James fully engaged in proceedings. The activity to catch Corporal James on the political campaign trail was dubbed Operation Outlaw by the JCF. By virtue of his actions, 11 days before the 2011 general election, Corporal James was accused of breaching the force's rules dealing with politics and public policy. He was also accused of breaching the force's ethics and integrity policy, as well as the force's standing orders dealing with malingering. The PNP won the December 29 election. 5 days later, on January 3, 2012, Corporal James received an oral notice that he was to make himself available to answer to the allegations against him. James reportedly demanded the notice in writing. He was served that notice. Nationwide News has seen no evidence that Corporal James reported for that interview, despite receiving both oral and written requests to do so. The report from the JCF accuses James of failing to cooperate with the investigation into his conduct. It also blasts him for having no respect for authority. The report further accuses James of bringing the police force into disrepute by his blatantly political actions. The report says his behavior at the time risked returning the JCF to a period where it was viewed as a partisan and political institution. It says his conduct also risked undermining the work of his colleagues. The damning report recommended that in the interest of the force, James should be separated from the JCF. It also recommended that the policeman be subjected to a lie detector test. The 2012 recommendation to dismiss him for political work is sure to raise eyebrows following the recent reference to him by PNP chairman Dr. Angela Brown-Burke as a comrade. It's not immediately clear what became of the 2012 recommendation to the Services Commission. Repeated efforts to reach the chief personnel officer in the Services Commission were unsuccessful. Calls to Corporal James were not answered. In a terse response to a WhatsApp request for a response to our story, the corporal invited our news center to go ahead and publish. He offered no further comment. Corporal James is currently under interdiction. Mahiri Stewart for Nationwide News.
Meanwhile, there were questions from as far back as 2008 as to whether Corporal Rohan James was physically resilient enough to be a policeman due to his numerous requests for sick leave. In 1 year, over a period of just over 3 months, the corporal reportedly took more than 60 days of sick leave. The revelation has sparked questions as to whether the Police Federation chairman abused and exploited the JCF's sick leave provision. Those questions formed part of the justification for the force's 2012 recommendation that he be retired in the public interest. Norgay Banton has that side of the story.
In a March 2008 letter, the superintendent in charge of the Kingston Western Division wrote to Corporal James informing him that his health was of concern to his superiors. The curious missive was issued following a revelation that in 2007, Corporal James reported sick on 7 occasions. Those occasions amounted to him taking 37 days of sick leave in that year alone. Corporal James was advised that if his health did not improve within 3 months, a report would be forwarded to the then Commissioner of Police, Rear Admiral Hardley Lewin, advising him that James was unfit to perform further duties in the JCF. In May 2008, Corporal James responded to the notice, explaining that he had been in a motor vehicle accident on April 4, 2007, while on the job. He noted that the relevant medical certificate had been submitted as verification. In October of the following year, the head of the Kingston Western Division wrote to Corporal James advising that between August 10 and October 16, 2008, a period of just over 3 months, the policeman had taken 65 days of sick leave. Those days were for injuries sustained in a second motor vehicle crash, this one occurring in August of 2008. The damage done to the police service vehicle in which James was traveling was described as minor. The JCF say no report had been submitted by James outlining the particulars of the accident which caused his injuries. Instead of being home recuperating from his alleged injuries, the JCF says Corporal James was doing outside work. Despite being off on sick leave for injuries purportedly sustained in that motor vehicle crash, the JCF alleged that James was seen representing persons at the orderly room and court of inquiry. He was reportedly being paid by the Police Federation to carry out these functions. The corporal was also allegedly spotted by fellow police personnel moonlighting as a private security guard at the Anthony Spalding Sports Complex, home of Arnett Gardens Football Club. This was at a time when his superiors believed he was on sick leave. The JCF accused James of exaggerating his illness by claiming he was suffering from spinal injuries. On at least 2 visits to Corporal James's listed address by his superiors to confirm that he was in fact recovering at home, he was not seen at the address. Following repeated notices from his superiors about his conduct, Corporal James reportedly accused them of, quote, moral turpitude and alleged that the notice about his alleged abuse of the sick leave provisions was, quote, tyrannic, oppressive, and malicious, end quote. He was warned that pretending to be ill in order to avoid work was a serious offense in the Jamaica Constabulary Force. Corporal James was advised to report for duty by October 17, 2008, at which time he was to have been examined by a medical board to assess his health. That assessment would determine his future service in the constabulary force. It is not clear if that examination ever occurred. Corporal James has refused to respond in detail to a request by our news center for comment on these issues. Nora Gay Banton for Nationwide News.
In the meantime, Nationwide News understands that the application by Corporal James for the Supreme Court to overturn his interdiction took a major turn today. This after he asked through his attorney Hugh Wildman for the presiding judge, Justice Carolyn Ty Powell, to recuse herself from the proceedings. It's understood that Corporal James claims justice